food, refreshments, and then if you want to, you can still buy material, many books that you want to buy. There's still stuff back there for sale. So we'll pray to begin, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Clarey. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity, and again, thank you for Dr. Clarey and for ICR and the work that they are doing. Lord, I pray that tonight that you'll be glorified and that your people will be encouraged, and that, Father, that you will continue to support the work and bless the work of ICR. Lord, we love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Dr. Clarey.
Well, I'm surprised you all came back. Sometimes I wonder, are they going to come back? Anybody new tonight? New? Weren't here yesterday? Some of you? Okay. That's pretty good. Is that too loud? Okay, it's working okay. Okay, well tonight, it is one of my favorites because I've always liked dinosaurs. Who likes dinosaurs in here? Anybody? So one or two people. The rest of you do too. You just don't want to admit it. There was a point in your life where you were fascinated by dinosaurs, and most of us are because they're so big, so many of them. And we'll talk about them tonight and how they fit into the Bible. There's lots of questions people have, but again, I just want to thank you all and your pastor for letting me to come out here and speak at this nice, wonderful church here in Piggott. Not Peugeot, right? It's Piggott. Okay. It's a great little town. So anyway, people have a lot of questions about dinosaurs. This one they have, aren't dinosaurs millions of years old? When you watch movies like Jurassic Park, they throw the 68 million in there, and they always throw the millions of years and millions and millions. And that's my daughter and I when I was younger, and she was a little younger. She's 35 now. But yeah, we're getting to that. That's one thing. And then why aren't dinosaurs, why aren't they mentioned in the Bible? Why don't you see the word dinosaur in the Bible? We'll talk about that too. And again, the biggest question, as some of you already figured out, is when are we going to see those gas prices again? So that's 180. That's not bad. That's back around probably 2000 or something like that, 1998 or something like that. It's a while back at a Sinclair gas station over there in, I think, South Dakota somewhere. You guys have Sinclair gas stations around at all? Once in a while? They always have the little green dinosaur. Well, anyway, stopped to get a picture. It's kind of cool. I found that you don't ride them, though. They get mad if you get on top of them, so try not that. Well, here's why dinosaurs are not in the Bible. This happy-looking gentleman, Sir Richard Owen, the British anatomist, he was probably the world's renowned anatomist at the time of his life. The Frenchman named Cuvier, George Cuvier, was the anatomist before him, and they looked at more bones of animals than anybody else, and so he was kind of the next one to pass the torch to. And he's the one that looked at these original bones that were finding of dinosaurs in England, and he said the hips are different. This is different than a normal reptile. It's a reptile, but the hips have holes in them, and so the hip sockets fit right in. So dinosaurs, like you see there on the far left, walk upright, whereas crocodiles and turtles and alligators, they sprawl. Their bones come up to the sides and they go down, so they drag their bellies. Dinosaurs didn't drag their bellies. Dinosaurs didn't drag their tails. When we see footprints of dinosaurs, we'll see some tonight, there's no tail dragging. There's no belly dragging. And the legs, they do walk very close together. And so the footprints have confirmed this guy's interpretation back in 1841. But when was the King James translated? 1611. So it's been a few hundred years later. That's why the word dinosaur is not in the Bible. It wasn't invented until a couple hundred years after the King James. So this is why. But you see dragons in the Bible. They talk about dragons, they talk about behemoth, they talk about Leviathan. We'll talk about behemoth and Leviathan later in my talk, and kind of what I think those might have been. So what does the Bible say? It says dinosaurs are created on day 6. Like it says in Job, we'll see later. Look at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He's referring to the creation day. All land animals are made on the same day, unless you're a flying animal, you're made on day 5. If you're a swimming animal, you're made on day 5. But the land animals, like dinosaurs and humans, were made on day 6. So God made the beast of the earth. So dinosaurs are a part of the beast of the earth. Dinosaurs are created to eat plants. Every animal was only supposed to eat plants. There was no death until Adam and Eve sinned. And then once Adam and Eve sinned, of course, then death was brought on. Like it says in Romans 5:12, by one man death was brought into the world. That's my paraphrasing of it. Which is why it's difficult for people to believe in like a gap theory. That there was a pre-world, that God recreated everything in verse 2 of the Bible. Because you'd have all this death below your feet. And then where's the evidence for the flood if you take away all the fossils and say that was something else? And so to me, the best way to read the Bible was with the clarity of the Bible. Just read it the way it is. Don't start making stuff up between the lines. And that's one of the things that, unfortunately, people have done. So God made the dinosaurs on the same day, and he made them to eat plants. He says, to every beast of the earth, which includes the dinosaurs, I've given every green herb for food. So that's from the King James, every green herb for food. So they weren't supposed to eat each other. But we do know they started eating each other because we can see the teeth marks. We can see teeth stuck in the bones. We can see scratch marks. So they started eating each other after Adam and Eve sinned. The whole world, including the animal world, went a little haywire and became very wicked. And that's why God had to start over again with the flood. He's going to wipe the slate clean and say, let's bring representation of every type of animal, 2 of every kind, onto the ark. And he doesn't exclude anything. God says creatures that moved along the ground, 2 of every kind, and food. So what kind of food would they have brought? Vegetation. Different plant foods for every animal. They didn't bring on a side of beef for the T-Rexes. And so might have wanted to, but the T-Rex was more than content to eat plants. And so just like today, many crocodiles and alligators, they dissect them and find out they're still eating a lot of plants. They're not just eating your poodle or your chihuahua they have in Texas. They're eating, or sometimes, unfortunately, people. But they ate plants. So creatures that moved along the ground, 2 of every kind. And then Genesis 7:21 talks about the flood. By day 150 of the flood, everything on land perished. They had the breath of life. So again, he's saying everything. 2 of every kind. He doesn't exclude anything. So the dinosaurs were on the ark. There's no exclusions that the Bible hints at all. Noah's Ark was very, very big. If you get up to Kentucky to AIG's or Ken Ham's big ark, it's worth seeing just to see the scale of it. It's kind of like seeing mountains. You look at a picture of mountains all day, like, oh, that's nice. When you get out there, you're like, wow. The whole 3D thing hits you. And the same thing is true of the ark. So it's well worthwhile, even though it's not ICR. But Ken Ham used to work for ICR back in the 80s, and he left ICR to start his own ministry. And so he's set up in Kentucky, there south of Cincinnati. If you get up that way, it's worth seeing. But it's very, very big. It's based on the cubit. And the cubit, to my understanding, was from the elbow to the finger of whoever was in charge, whatever king was in charge at the time. And it's possible humans were bigger back in those days. They said they were giants back then, so the average human, like Adam and Eve, might have been a little bit bigger taller than we are. So it might have even been bigger than this. It might have been another 100 feet longer for all we know. But it does talk about three levels. It was 75 feet wide and 45 feet high, so plenty big enough. We actually did the math because, again, who doesn't like math? Some of you don't like math? Anyway, math is great because it helps you do a lot of things. We took a database of 353 maybe, dinosaurs, and did the math on those and figured out the average dinosaur size is about the size of a bison or a buffalo, about 1,500 pounds. That's the average adult size. Because there's a lot of small dinosaurs, there's a lot of really big dinosaurs. So we really took the median, the halfway point. Half of them are smaller, half of them are bigger. Because the big ones, as we'll see, got so big they skewed the data. We'd have had an average, it was way too big. So we went with the median. Did I lose y'all on that? Remember your old statistics classes? And try to forget it. But anyway, that's about the average size. Nobody knew really until we did that. People were guessing, no, horse, this, and that. And so I said, let's do the math. That's what the math came out to be. And there's only about 60 kinds of dinosaurs. There's just a lot of variety. Just like there's only one race of humans. People talk about racism. There's no races. There's just humans. Just different color skin, different colored hair, different colored eyes, different amounts of melanin and things like that. There's only one human race. We can all interbreed. We're all one species. Darwin started racism, really, by trying to indicate that some people are less evolved than others, and that started the whole process, which was taken in. People still use that today and try to divide us by races, but there's really no races whatsoever. We're just the human race that God created, and we're all made in his image. So we're all different than the animal world. We have the eternal soul that we have to make that decision for Jesus while we're alive. So it's about 60 kinds. There's lots of varieties of them. And when we look at the facts, the rocks themselves, that's really what gives us the data about dinosaurs. We find it by digging them up. And I think I showed this picture yesterday. I was much younger. trying to relive my glory days, back when I was in my 40s, like your pastor. I called about his age now. So I was young at one point. Evolutionary myths, let's go through this. So the rest of my talk, I'm going to go through 3 sort of evolutionary myths, and one of them is the extinction, that they went extinct from an asteroid. But let's start out with the ancestors. A little bit of repetition from yesterday, for those of you who weren't here yesterday. Some of this will all be new, but there's a couple of these examples. I switched them out this afternoon and got rid of one of them, because you guys want new stuff. Right, Kendall? New stuff. So they had many answers. That's the story they have. And then secondly, they evolved into birds. We'll get into more detail on that. None of these are true, by the way. These are myths. And then third, that they're 232, I think that's about the current number now, to 66 million years ago. So you might have heard 65. Well, they changed that about 15 years ago to 66. Because what's a million years between friends? Right? When they're just, it's like monopoly money anyway. It's not real, but they think it is. They claim it is, but yet they move all the time. So now dinosaurs are supposed to go extinct 66 million years ago, whereas 15 years ago they would have said, no, 65, we know for sure. But then they jumped 66. How do they just change things and then act like nobody notices? So you'll still see movies that come out called 65 about 5 years ago. You would have missed the whole thing. Should have been 66. But I never used to make my students memorize these years because they're always changing them, because none of them are real anyway. They're monopoly money. Kind of like Canadian money where I'm from. It's like, is it real? I'm not so sure. It is, I think. And finally, we'll look at the extinction question. This is the most popular story out there. You've heard about the asteroid hitting, killing the dinosaurs. Anybody not hear that? Anybody hear that? Heard all that? Well, look at that. In the course of my studies, looking at those oil wells and columns, I got to look at the location where they say the asteroid hit. And we'll see the truth, what the rocks really show. So what the rocks really show is what I'm telling you tonight. This is the reality of these things. This is not alive today, fortunately. I'm kind of glad dinosaurs are extinct, by the way, because I wouldn't want this roaming around here in the fields. You're out there trying to pick cotton or something, or hoeing beans, and be like, I think I'm going to go. Let you guys do it. So this is what we find today. We found these bones. This is a sauropod called a Seismosaurus. They only found about half of this in New Mexico, and they've been digging it out for years in really, really hard sandstone. But only about half of it's there. They said, well, if you had the whole thing, how big could it be? And they made a plastic model of what it could have been. And it was 131 feet long. I couldn't even get it all in the picture. And this tail keeps going a little bit longer. And there's my daughter for scale. So I used my kids for scale. I had kids just for scale. So you see my kids a lot in the pictures because you don't know how big it is unless there's somebody there. So against rocks, fossils, you need something for scale. And I said, well, I'll just bring a scale along, one of my 2 kids at the time. And so I stick them there and then take pictures of them. That's why you had kids, right? For scale. Because if you look at a rock, they all look big or small. You need something for scale. So dinosaurs the same way. So let's look at these sauropods. There's a couple of unique features, and I could go on for more than this, but there's 6 big unique features on sauropods, particularly in their necks. But they have a large body size. All these sauropods, these long-necked dinosaurs are called sauropods. That's one of the big groups. They have long necks and long tails to kind of balance out when they walk. They had 4-legged stance. They all walked on 4 legs because if they walked on 2, they'd fall over. They have a small, very small head at the end of that big, long neck. If you get a big head on the end of a big, long neck, you'd be just laying there all day long with your head down. So God designed them with very small heads on the end of that big, long neck. And they're the only animals that have 10 or more vertebrae, 10 or more bones in their neck. Many of them had more than that, 20 or even more. There's no animal that has that many vertebrae in the neck. We have 5 or 6 or something like that. Anybody in the medical field in here? How many? We have 7? Is that pretty common for mammals in general? Or? I don't know. But most of them, there's no animal besides the sauropods that has 10 or more. I'm pretty sure that's the truth. And a lot of them had 20. So they even had elongate neck bones, and the neck bones were hollowed out. God designed them hollowed out so they wouldn't be so heavy. They have big, long necks, big, long tails, but they were kind of hollowed out, so they weren't really that heavy. And they could balance out the big, long tail almost like a seesaw or teeter-totter. They could actually balance each other out. So you need a big, long tail to balance out the neck, etc. Even the T-Rex had a big, long tail to balance out the big, heavy head, as we'll see later. But there's no ancestors of these found in the rocks when you look down below. There's supposed to be ancestors to everything if you believe evolution. Everything evolved from something. But just like yesterday, these examples, there's hundreds of sauropods up here, kinds, up here mostly in the Jurassic and a few into the Cretaceous. But you look down below into the Triassic where dinosaurs appear. In the lower Jurassic, there's really nothing that looks like these big sauropods. They just show up in the fossils, fully formed and ready to go. Just the way God created them on day 6 of the creation week. There's a lot of varieties. This one particularly is Brachiosaurus. You can see it's got a shorter tail and longer neck, but it's got longer front legs. It's unusual because it has longer front legs. Most of it had longer back legs. So we think it did kind of stand its neck up a lot more than most. And if we looked at this one yesterday, Tyrannosaurus rex. There's ancestors to that. This is from the Field Museum in Chicago. I got a chance to dig on a T-Rex out in Montana years ago. So that's some of the bones we were digging up. And you can see the second one on the right has a T-Rex tooth. It's about this long. There's a little rock hammer for scale. I didn't have my kids with me on this one, so I had to use a rock hammer. But we were staying in teepees, digging with Jack Horner's crew, who was the main scientist sort of in charge of the Jurassic Park movies. He was kind of the consultant on the Jurassic Park movies, so he got all of his evolution in there. I just didn't tell him I was a creationist. I was learning how to dig dinosaurs and having a good time doing that and talking to a few of the guys. But if he knew I was a creationist, he probably wouldn't have let me join his crew that year. But I had some funding from my college to go do that, so it's kind of nice. So I got a chance to dig around, but again, just like yesterday, the same result. T-Rexes are all found in those upper Cretaceous rocks, the upper dinosaur layers, and there's nothing below that looks like a T-Rex at all. They just show up fully formed. I could go on for all 60 kinds of dinosaurs and show you the same thing. There's no ancestors to any of them. David Weisample, we said this yesterday, who looked at all the dinosaurs more than anybody. He goes, alas, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is empty. That's the bottom line there. There are no ancestors to any dinosaurs. So how did they evolve? If you ask your resident evolutionist that, how did they evolve? Where did they come from? They have no idea. They try to say, well, maybe from a crocodile or maybe an alligator. Well, where's the path? Where's the transitional fossils in between? They don't have any. We talked about that yesterday. There's no undisputed transitional fossils. They might argue, well, there's one or two here. There could be, but there should be a long list of thousands of things every step of the way, and yet we see almost nothing. So the fossil record supports creation and burial in the flood as the floodwaters rose higher. So myth busting number one, the facts are this, that there are no known ancestors to any dinosaur groups. Secondly, all fossils, whether it's a trilobite, talked about yesterday, or some other animal, they all show up suddenly without ancestors. This is one of my favorite discoveries by the Polish scientists in Mongolia, by the way. It's called the fighting dinosaurs. That's a velociraptor laying on its side, and there's a protoceratops, a ceratopsian without horns, kind of without horns, and they're fighting just as they were buried, almost like two WWE wrestlers going out in the ring, and they're just buried instantly, and froze that way for thousands of years until they were excavated by the scientists. But you can see the arm of the velociraptor is in the mouth of the protoceratops. Protoceratops wasn't going to eat it; he was just trying to protect himself or herself. Like a trapped rat. A rat might try to eat, might not be trying to eat you, but if you get too close to one, they might bite at you, and that's what was happening here. So they were fighting away, and they got buried. That's how rapidly the flood came on. And just like Jesus says today when he comes back, it's going to be like a thief in the night. We got to be prepared. If the flood came on suddenly, just like when Jesus returns, it'll be the same way. So let's move on to point number 2. We're 1/4 of the way through the talk, but the good stuff's still coming. So, evolved into birds. Here we go. We're going to dig into this a little bit because I've got a book on this coming out later this summer, I hope, or at least by fall. And so if you get on ICR's website, you can get a little paperback book. It'll be about 180 pages long. It should be a pretty good little book on that, I hope. Let's look at this. We looked at this yesterday. This is what the evolutionists put in books. This is in textbooks, bird books. Doesn't matter if it's a bird book now or a dinosaur book. They'll still tell you the same story, that dinosaurs evolved into birds. And they did this path, but yet that's not correct because the bird there at the end should be back in the middle, as we'll see. So did some birds or some dinosaurs have feathers like this? That's the question. One of the questions, did they have feathers? Were they warm-blooded even? A lot of people say dinosaurs were warm-blooded because birds are warm-blooded. Mammals are warm-blooded. We maintain our same body temperature all the time. Whereas reptiles have to get, they have to heat up in the sun to get active, that sort of thing. But I believe dinosaurs were in fact cold-blooded, but that's another talk. But did some dinosaurs have feathers? Is this our national bird, or is this the eagle really looks like? Probably not. This is what a real bird looks like, even though it's an extinct bird with that little bony tail. But notice that tail is really thin. It's just a thin, almost like a feather coming off the back end of it. It had little claws and tiny little teeth. But scientists have studied this bird over and over, Archaeopteryx, and they realized that this bird could fly. Probably flew like a pheasant. So it wasn't a really good flyer, but it could fly nonetheless. Scientists that believe in evolution try to say this has proto-feathers on it. The little hair-like things coming off the back. This is called Sinothoropteryx. It's found in China. Sinothoropteryx. It's a little bitty dinosaur. But they try to say those are feathers coming off the back. And off the back of the neck. Do they look like feathers? They don't really look like feathers. So they, instead of calling them true feathers, they say, oh, these are proto-feathers. These are feathers evolving from scales to feathers, which is a very difficult thing to do. They're not that simple. Stephen Broussard, who's a pretty famous paleontologist, he's written a lot of books now in the last 10 years, says the bones of these species are covered with a thick, feathery fluff, not the quilpine feathers of living birds, but simpler filament-like feathers that look like hair. He wrote this almost 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago. It seemed like just last year I got that quote. It's been 10 years already? I need to get some new stuff. Anyway, but that's the same story they tell you today. He says, he looks at these things, you see that little hair-like structures coming off. So what are they really? Well, there was a study done in 2005, 10 years before he said that, by Alan Fiducia, who's a bird paleontologist. He's an evolutionist, but he's a bird paleontologist. And he demonstrated that these are probably just decomposition of collagen in the skin. So he says you squish this animal and some of the collagen is going to leak off and squeeze off, and you see these fibers. Collagen makes fibers. That's why it makes leather, makes our skin tough. But he did some real empirical studies, unlike the evolutionary paleontologist. So he took a dolphin, dead dolphin, I don't think he killed it, and he squished it under a bunch of sediment. And then he peeled it all back and looked at it, and he saw all these hair-like fibers coming off the side. Dolphins aren't known for their massive amounts of hair. You don't see hairy dolphins. They have some hair because they're mammals, but they don't have a lot of hair. So he saw all this massive hair coming off when he squished it. He says, this is just collagen in that tough skin. See all the different layers of collagen. And some dinosaurs had over 30 layers of collagen-rich skins. They're really tough skin, just like alligators are really tough skin. And they're alternating different directions, just like plywood does, to make it even stronger. But when you squish these animals, you get a lot of collagen coming off. So he says all these little hair-like things, it's not proto-feathers at all. They're not turned into birds, not sprouting feathers. These are just collagen being squished by the burial process. Again, these are real feathers here. This is a Microraptor, which is almost the same as Archaeopteryx, except it had longer feathers on its back legs. See these big long feathers coming off the back legs? Had a very thin, bony tail, had little claws on its wings. I think it's probably a cousin, kind of like a crow and a raven between the Archaeopteryx and Microraptor. But because it's found in China, they named it something else. But the same thin, bony tail. Notice there's no little bones coming down that we see in dinosaurs. I'll talk about that later. Unfortunately, most of our new evidence is coming from China, which is very untrustworthy. Their science is untrustworthy, and there's actually been frauds. In 1999, there was a big fraud called Archaeoraptor. I remember this when I was teaching college in Michigan. I wrote into our National Geographic when this came out. I said, you're teaching people bad science because you're naming something on a specimen that they bought at a rock and gem show here in the United States. And they say, oh, it's from China. And it was half bird, half dinosaur. I said, whether it is, this is not a good, you're breaking the rules of science. Unless you pull it out of the ground yourself, you don't know if it's a fraud. Well, they got caught in that. They made a big issue in National Geographic, put out a big article in it, hit an hour-long TV show I watched because I was interested in dinosaurs. I want to see what they had. But they did a CT scan of it. Even before it went to press, they did a CT scan and showed that it's half bird, half dinosaur, and a few other things. It's a mixture of about 3 or 4 different specimens that they glued together and fooled all the scientists. So in black is a dinosaur, in red is a bird. And they glued it together and they had a half bird, half dinosaur, which is what they wanted. So they saw what they wanted to see. your itching ears heard what they want to hear. Where have we heard that before? They basically bought into it because it's what they wanted to see. They were like, oh, this is so good. It's exactly what you wanted to see. But they were all fooled. So when it came out, they realized this is actually made out of about 3 or 4 different species, but the Chinese excavators are so good at faking it that they didn't even notice until they did a CT scan. And there's been a few other examples of that as well, but that's the classic fraud that fooled the scientific community because they saw what they wanted to see. In 2017, Biology Letters Journal came out with an article that said there's no feathers on T-Rexes at all, or any animal that's even close related to T-Rex. In their worldview, it shows without question T-Rex had scaly skin. And they almost lamented this. They said, well, the Tyrannosaurs as a kind didn't have feathers, but all the rest of them did because they didn't have anything to prove. But here's what they found. This is T-Rex skin right here. There's no feathers on it at all. They found a bunch of these different specimens of Tyrannosaurs, all the Tyrannosaur kind, and all of them showed scaly skin. So there's lots of examples of scaly skin all over the dinosaurs. And there's a few that try to say are proto-feathers, but those are just collagen. And things that have real feathers, we'll see, are actually birds. A Microraptor and Archaeopteryx are actually birds. Birds do this. Even penguins do this. This is at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo in Colorado Springs. You can go to your local zoo. Where's your local zoo here? You got to go to Memphis or somewhere? Go to the zoo and you can watch the birds. They preen their feathers. I looked it up. 9% of the day, 9% of their waking hours, they're preen feathers on the average. What if they don't preen their feathers? What happens? It looks like you when you get up in the morning with your hair just all over the place. And they can't fly, they can't swim, they can't do what they're supposed to do if they don't have their feathers combed, basically. They have a preening gland, they reach around and get oil and all this kind of stuff. And very complex system God designed in the bird, which dinosaurs don't have. How are you going to preen feathers when you have jaws like this? This is what they say. They say these dinosaurs, although now they're saying the T-Rexes didn't, they're saying most of these dinosaurs had to have feathers and they had to have some way to preen them. They never bring this up in the books, that you have to preen feathers and you can't preen feathers without a beak. And this is some snow we had in Dallas a few years ago. We got about this much again this year. And it shuts the whole city down. It's kind of funny. Birds don't walk like ours. These are birds hopping around. See how they kind of hop? Because they're walking on they're only moving their knees and their ankles. Their thigh bones don't move. So we have thigh bones that swings back and forth as I walk. Well, birds, this isn't moving. It's staying forward all the time. They're just moving like this. And they're balancing right here. There's dinosaurs and you and I balance on our hips. 4-legged ones, 2-legged ones. But birds do not. And it's all in the hips. Here's dinosaur footprints, me standing there in Colorado a few years ago at a place outside of Denver called Dinosaur Ridge. We wrote an article about this in our Acts and Facts. You can go online and look it up if you want. But these are some of the 4-legged dinosaurs here. There's the back leg and the front leg. It's a very small front leg. And these duck-billed dinosaurs, you can see them going along there. This is a 2-legged dinosaur here. So you can see how closely they walk together, just like you and I. You know, they're very close together because the legs came straight down. So this verifies the idea that the light dinosaur legs came straight down. So it makes them different than reptiles. But they color these so they show up. In reality, those footprints are the same color as the rocks. But then those rocks got tilted up after the flood. So during the flood, they were walking around, and then they got swept away, and the bones are somewhere else. And the footprints got buried so quickly they were preserved. How do you preserve footprints today? You go to the beach, they don't last very long. You go anywhere, you don't find footprints. But we find, recently I wrote an article and came in our news, on our online, but sometimes we put them in our Acts and Facts. But there's a news story on ICR.org about 18,000 footprints in Bolivia they found. 18,000 of them. And there's some where they're walking, and then later they show that they're swimming because the water came in at them so fast that the swimming ones were stepping on top of the ones where they could kind of see a few little footprints where they're just scratching the bottom. They interpret the dinosaurs as swimming. They were walking first, and the water got suddenly deeper, and then they started to swim. But how do you preserve those without burying those prints fast? And that's what you have to do here. Here's the way dinosaur hips look. As I mentioned, they have holes in the hips. They have what they call an open acetabulum. Am I pronouncing that right? Acetabulum, something like that. That's the hip hole, hip sockets. See, there were holes. Doesn't matter what kind, bird hipped or lizard hipped. There's the bird. That's the T-Rex has the lizard hip style, and the other dinosaur groups have the bird hip, but all of them have holes, except for maybe ankylosaurs, but they're the ones that look like little tanks. So nobody's confusing them with birds. But the most bird-like ones have the lizard hips, which is rather ironic, but all of them had holes in them. When you look at a bird, here's some birds. You can go to, well, you guys don't have a Costco nearby, do you? You go to one of your local stores and get one of those rotisserie chickens and rip the legs off it, and you can look at the hip socket. They're not open. They're closed. They're a socket like we have. We have a hole that it fits into, but it doesn't go all the way through. So they have closed acetabulums, or partially closed acetabulums. They're not wide open. Birds also pivot, like I said, at the knee. So the first two, the blue ones are birds, the green ones, the dinosaur. So you got your Gallus, the chicken, get your Microraptor, that feathered one, the back feathers and the back legs, and the little thin bony tail. They all walk like that. And then Allosaurs are swinging their whole big green femur back and forth. See this bump on the back of the Allosaur? You don't see this bump on these animals. This is a muscle attachment site called a fourth trochanter. You don't have to write that down. Just a muscle attachment bump. And that went back to the tail. These had a thin bony tail there was no way to attach the muscles to because it wasn't moving. But here you had to pull it back to the tail, so every time they walked, each step, the tail would swing from side to side on dinosaurs, whereas the Microraptor and the birds, their tails are independent of their legs. So dinosaurs balance on the hips, so everything balances. A beautiful design that the Lord Jesus made. The head, big head. The reason the arms are small is because if they were big, they were too heavy. People wonder, how come they're so small? If they were big, they'd be too heavy. God knew what he was doing. Big head, see even holes in the head. The eyes are back here. There's holes in the head to make the head a little bit lighter. But the arms are small. Everything balances right there. But see all those bones coming down the back of the tail? Unlike Archaeopteryx, unlike Microraptor, with just a thin bony tail, that's where the muscles attach to pull the hips back. So here's the way they look. These are bird muscles on the top. Here's the femur. There's nothing attached to the femur. The muscle pulls back here below the knee, so the muscle's pulling back here, but not up here. Dinosaurs, that's that bump, that fourth trochanter pulling back, and that's why they need all these extra. See, there's very few little bones sticking down to attach to, because it's a completely different way of locomotion. That's how you tell a bird from a dinosaur. It's all in the hips. Evolutionists don't bring any of this up. They don't bring any of this up. Even I have friends of mine who are creation paleontologists, and they'll say that these are feathered dinosaurs. They don't look at the hips either. It's all in the hips. It's all about whether there's that fourth trochanter, that bump on the hip, where they have all these muscle attachment sites called chevrons coming down. So you have just a little bit there just for the bone here, but the attachment's here, not on the femur. So the whole leg's not moving. I know it's a lot of anatomy, but the anatomy is where you tell the difference. But yet, I have friends that go, oh, look at this feathered dinosaur. I haven't seen a feathered dinosaur yet. I've seen feathered birds. Everything we've seen so far are feathered birds with a thin bony tail, but they're birds nonetheless. And again, I talked about this yesterday. The biggest problem is you find birds well below dinosaurs that are supposed to evolve into birds. How do you do that? How do you have the grandchild giving birth to the grandparent? Again, I want to try that at home. Feel free to try that at home. You can't go back in time and do that. So you've got birds down here, like Archaeopteryx, and there's other birds. They're even more bird-like than Archaeopteryx. Doesn't even have a bony tail down here. And the ones that are supposed to be most bird-like are found up here in the Upper Cretaceous rocks. This is totally a lie. A lot of what being taught in school are just out-and-out lies. It's what they want it to be. When you look at the rocks and you look at the anatomy, completely different. Dinosaurs are not birds. Birds are not dinosaurs. You are not eating a dinosaur on Thanksgiving Day if you're not a vegan. I don't know what you eat if you're a vegan. Big pile of tofu. I don't know what you eat. I don't know. I know some people are vegetarians, and that's okay. But most of us will be eating turkey. It's not a dinosaur. I heard Bob Bacher, a famous paleontologist, say, when you're eating Thanksgiving, you should be more respectful because you're eating a dinosaur. I'm like, Look at the hips, Bob. Look at the hips. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. You love turkey? That's pretty good. Well, I do too. It's pretty good stuff. So, yeah. So here's how, again, we talked about this yesterday, how the paleontologists explain this away if you believe in evolution. You got to say, well, we know there's birds down here and there's dinosaurs are supposed to evolve into birds. There must be an unknown ancestor to both. And they draw a dashed line down here, draw a dashed line down here, and they walk away and drop the mic and say, problem solved. But yet they never find the unknown ancestor. They're just making stuff up. They're literally just making it up to fit their story. When you look at the rocks show birds living with dinosaurs. And then, eventually, many of these dinosaurs and birds all went extinct, but that's another story. Gunter Weil said this. I showed you this yesterday. They can't be because they're later than Archaeopteryx. Yet we haven't found any unknown ancestors, unfortunately. So they realize what they're looking for, but they can't find it. This unknown stays unknown. And as I predicted yesterday, I predicted it always will be unknown. They're never going to find a half bird, half dinosaur. They're never going to find a half bird, half dinosaur relative somewhere down deeper in the rocks, because God made every animal unique from the start, just like he made each one of us. He created each and every one of us as we're born, and before born, at the inception, or the conception. I'll get it right. All right, dinosaurs did not evolve into birds at all. This is kind of one of my favorite pictures that, again, you can do this yourself with AI now. Birds did not evolve dinosaurs did not evolve into birds or vice versa. Birds are buried in rocks before the bird-like dinosaurs, and some are just out hoaxes. Because sometimes scientists, they'll get something glued together and go, oh yeah, cool, and then they find out it's a hoax. So let's move on to the age of dinosaurs. We covered some of this yesterday as well. And the biggest thing in the last 20 years has been the discovery of dinosaur soft parts and tissues and proteins that are found in the bones. And Mary Schweitzer found this, I think it's supposed to be 68 or 70 million years old, according to them. And this is, if you watch the video, 60 minutes video of this, you'll see they actually pull it apart and it comes together like a rubber band. It was still stretchy. And all that red colored stuff, she tested that, and that had a lot of hemoglobin proteins in it, like our red blood cells. So it's still red. And they found a mosasaur, a big swimming reptile. The middle part of it had a red spot, and they found that had hemoglobin in it as well. They've gone on and on and on, found about 130 examples now of proteins in animals, not just dinosaurs, but animals that lived even in rocks buried earlier. Supposedly, if you believe evolution, 500 million years ago, they still have proteins. How can those proteins last 500 million years? How can they last 68 million? When chemists have studied these decay rates of proteins under ideal conditions, sitting in a cave somewhere in Tennessee, for millions of years, there'd be nothing there. Perfect condition, there'd still be nothing there. They decay away in less than 1 million years. They project into the future and they're gone. So how can they survive? And the scientists scratch their heads and go, well, it seems impossible, but they won't give up on it. There's been, I think, now 130 papers. I got to update my slide. These are those red blood cells and blood vessels. Some of them go back supposedly 150 million years. And the more we dig up in Montana, we're going to have a dinosaur dig this summer in June. I see us going up to Glendive, Montana, digging in the Hell Creek Formation. And that's where they find a lot of these proteins in these bones. And you get to keep what you find. Unless it's a tooth, they don't give you the teeth are worth too much money. So, but if you find any other piece of bone this big or whatever, you get to dig it out. It's yours. So if we go on one of our digs this summer or next, we'll continue to do them. It's kind of a great experience for everybody. Myth busting 3, the facts: the dinosaurs are young because the soft tissues and the proteins tell us they can't be millions of years old. It's not a problem for creation scientists, but it creates a problem for your local evolutionist, which most scientists buy into because that's all they're taught. And they don't talk about these things. Now in their textbooks, they'll talk about chemical fossils. They just refer to these as chemical fossils. They don't explain how they can survive for millions and millions of years. But they don't give up on their millions of years. They just say, well, we don't know how they were preserved, but they obviously were, because we know these rocks are millions of years old. And so, well, maybe the rocks aren't millions of years old. You ever think of that? Maybe the rocks really are young. And they really were buried in the flood. That's why we get this wonderful preservation of these animals and the footprints and everything else. finally, let's look at this, and we'll get into, you guys, as they say in Louisiana, we're going to give you a little land yap. You know what that means? Land yap means you can get a little something extra. So when you go to a restaurant in New Orleans, they give you your meal. Before your meal, they might bring up a plate of fried oysters, just as a gift from the chef. They call that land yap. So we're going to give you a little extra gift tonight and talk about Leviathan and Behemoth a little bit more than I normally do. But let's talk about this, how they went extinct from an asteroid story. Who's heard this? Now, we've all pretty much, I've argued with a 7-year-old kid till I was blue in the face. At the dinosaur, you can't argue with a 7-year-old kid. It's like, I finally gave up. I said, all right, you win. It was an asteroid. But he was convinced it was an asteroid. He saw some TV show, and he believed it. Or his parents or somebody told him. And, you know, you're supposed to believe your parents at that age, for the most part. All right, get in trouble with the kids. Let's look at this a little more carefully. Here's the story that they sell you. You know, and I have swampland in Florida for sale, too. Actually, I don't, but it's the classic story. But here's, you know, the dinosaurs are supposed to be walking along one day, and a big asteroid came in like this. And I'll give you, here's real footage we shot from space of it actually happening. We went back in time and shot this real footage. Here it is coming in. And there it hits, and the Yucatan Peninsula goes out, wipes out. You know, 75% of the animals and species on Earth all go extinct, supposedly, because you changed ecological zones is the real problem. But here's what it's based on. It's based on a gravity signature. I put quotes on crater because there is no crater. There's no crater there. You can go there and walk around all you want. There's no crater. There's no indentation like you see in Arizona. You guys ever been to the Arizona Beringer crater, meteor crater they call it? It's about a mile. I finally got there last summer. It's like $25 to get in there, just to see a hole in the ground. But it was worth seeing once. Won't do it again. But that's a real crater. There's no crater. This is a gravity signature. Gravity just, you've got some things down deep in the earth where the rocks have a different density, and you might have a couple of things coming in, like this northwest gravity high coming in red, kind of coming in that way, and you got a tertiary basin, kind of a sagging thing going through this way, and they overlap, and so you get kind of a circle. But it's all based on the density of rocks, shallow rocks and deep rocks. They all add together, and they're very, very ambiguous interpretations. Geologists looking for oil never use gravity. It's like, we want seismic. Yeah, shoot some seismic. And they did that too. But there's no crater. This is the Yucatan Peninsula in white. That's the edge of it. Kind of going along there. This will be the Gulf of America. It's supposed to hit right there, kind of half on, half off. But there's no crater. People are just shocked when I tell them that. It's just every picture they show you is a gravity map. They never show you the surface of the Earth because there is no crater. It's flat. So I looked at all the wells when I was doing my research across all those continents that you heard so much about and you were bored with, and some of you fell asleep during that talk, especially the back row Baptists. You have back row Baptists and Missionary Baptist Church? That's me. I'm usually in the back going, I'm the skeptic. So I know what you guys are doing back there, making fun of the professor. That's what I used to do. These are all wells. They took cores. They actually cored the earth, took the rocks out, and they looked at the cores. So I put them, and there's a new one they drilled offshore, the M0077A. They thought they were going to prove it. And they said they did, but they didn't. So I looked at all these, and there should have been a lot of melt. If you got an object that's coming in that's supposed to be as big as it was to make that gravity signature, you should have about 2 miles of melted rock from all the heat from the impact. So a big meteor that big should have melted a lot of rock. Well, how much melt did we find in those wells where they actually cored them? It isn't like they just did well logs. They actually took the cores of the rocks out, pulled these rocks out thousands of feet down, cored the things, and this is what they found. Here's the wells that go across it. I know you're not used to looking at wells maybe, but I colored them by rock type, kind of cutting across the different areas. And then the red is the melt. Do you see a lot of melt? You should shake your head no. One well, there's a little bit in that one. It's about 100 meters or 100 yards, like the football field, and this one's about 300 yards, 3 football fields. There should have been 2 miles of melt all over the place. So if it's a big impact, where's the melt? Remember that commercial, Where's the Beef? Where's the melt? And it was even worse than that. I stood at a conference at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was half asleep, and they presented a lot of this new data from this new well they drilled offshore, the one over there. They drilled in here. They hit a bunch of granite. That brown stuff's granite they drilled offshore, and they think they hit some, they just drilled into granite. They could have kept drilling, there's more granite all the way down to the bottom of the crust. They claim we proved it. It's just you hit granite. There's no melt, it's just granite. It's kind of interesting how they don't care. And all the fractures they talked about in that lecture in the rocks, there's cracks in the rocks, you've seen cracks in rocks, all in the same direction, they're all still sealed over. That rock in that well was supposed to have shot out in their computer models when it hit, supposed to shot out about a mile and splat, twisted around all these different contortions and ended up where they drilled into it. And they said none of the pre-impact fractures were contorted. So at the end of the talk, I said, how do you explain that? So how if this thing's supposed to move, like when water hits a mud puddle, it kind of splatters a little bit. How come it didn't twist it around? They looked at me like, And there was like 6 of them up there in this panel, and none of them had an answer. And I didn't tell them I was a creationist. I just, as a structural geologist who deals with faults and fractures, how come these weren't twisted and contorted? And they never addressed that in any of their papers. They just stopped talking about it because it doesn't fit the story. So they realized that what they said doesn't fit. So a lot of things in science that aren't really science. A lot of it's just stories. Here's the gravity signature again. This is the gravity map, the newest location. Here's where they drilled. Here's the seismic that shows the reality. They drilled that red well, and here's the surface here and all these sediments. Top of the KPGs here was supposed to have hit and all this stuff. Where's the crater? They misinterpreted this in their publication. They try to force one in there, but this is what it looks like. There's nothing there. There's no crater. There's no melt, and it gets worse. There's no iridium. You're like, what's iridium? Iridium is a rare earth element. It's not very common on Earth, but it's supposed to be the dust from this impact. They came from outer space, had all this iridium, and then blew up and shot this dust all over the Earth. Because you can find iridium in different places around the world at about that same level. But you can go down 50 feet and it's there too. You can go up 50 feet, it's there too. You go to Montana, it's on one hill. Go to the next hill, it's not there. So it's not everywhere. But shouldn't it be in the wells where it hit, near the smoking gun barrel? You would think there'd be a lot of iridium there. Well, kids, it gets worse. They only found traces in 3 of them. 3 of the 10 wells. So where'd all the smoke go? I heard somebody say, well, it all blew away. Like, no, it should be the most right there. That's where when a gun goes off, that's where all the smoke is, right? Hits there, you should have a lot of iridium. All the iridium can be explained by volcanoes. Volcanoes in Indonesia produce a lot of iridium. So remember we talked about the volcanoes were peaking toward the end of the flood, near the KPG boundary and the end of the Cretaceous. You get a lot of iridium being produced by these subductions on volcanoes. So the reason you find any iridium in most of these places is because of volcanoes. There's no crater, there's no melt, and there's no iridium there, and the rocks didn't get contorted for that matter. So I wrote a big paper about this you can look up online. It's free, it's on Answers Research Journal. I think I wrote it back in 2017. At the time, there was only 2 wells that had iridium. They had to look and look and look, and they found one of the other wells did have some iridium, but not much. And so I conclude here, although some meteorites likely struck the Earth during the flood, we need to critically assess each one. This one I think you can explain away as either a very small impact, poof, it didn't do much, or no impact at all. Just volcanoes can explain it. Even the shock quartz, all these different things we see, volcanoes produce all that as well. So I went through in 10,000 boring words, explain away everything. Now, if you're into it, you're into it. But I basically talked about each all these things can form from magmas coming up fast. You get shock quartz and all these features they claim are evidence of impacts really aren't. They're very ambiguous. And gravity is very ambiguous. There is no crater. So myth busting for there's likely no asteroid at all that hit there. There are other asteroids that hit. There's a few other craters we can see the craters for. Like there's one in Sweden. And there's the one over in Arizona, of course, that happened after the flood. But there are not as many impacts as they're made out to be. So not enough melt, almost no iridium, like they just drilled a basement, uplift, the basement high we call them, that overlaps with the shallow basin and then creates this semicircular thing. Two overlapping patterns can actually coincide to make an overlapping sort of a circle. And that's what I think happened. Again, gravity, this is gravity. That's not the surface of the earth. It's, every time you see this in a book, they don't even tell you a lot of times. They'll just put a picture of the gravity and don't tell you it's a gravity map. They want to get the impression this is the surface of the earth. And it's not. It's just, it's hocus pocus. It's the most ambiguous data that geophysicists deal with. Nobody would drill a well based on gravity alone. They would shoot seismic data. So how did dinosaurs really go extinct? This gets us into the Leviathan and Behemoth. Because they were still around when humans were around after the flood. So partly because I think climate differences from the pre-flood to post-flood. The atmosphere, I believe, changed dramatically. There's less oxygen now than there probably was. There's less CO2 now than there was, even though it's increasing. So what? Plants love it. They're growing better than ever. But it was a lot higher than the flood, before the flood, because we could see all this lush vegetation all over. And even evolutionary scientists believed during the time of the dinosaurs it was a global greenhouse. And it wasn't caused by dinosaurs burning coal, and smoking cigarettes, or whatever they were supposed to be doing to bring on climate change. You know, they realized it did happen in the past, even if you're an evolutionist. And so I just think in the pre-flood world, there was a lot more oxygen and more CO2. There weren't big storms in the pre-flood world. You didn't have lightning strikes. You didn't have the differences in temperature we have today, so you didn't have these cold fronts and warm fronts forming, making these intense low-pressure systems and tornadoes. None of that was happening in the pre-flood world, I don't believe, because everything was too uniform in temperature from top to bottom. And a lot of it was because of the atmosphere. But a lot of that atmosphere got sucked out in the flood year to make limestone. Because limestone is calcium carbonate. A lot of CO2 goes in to make that. So it took a lot of oxygen and CO2 out of the atmosphere. So when Noah and the animals got off the ark, they were like getting out at 10,000 feet in elevation. There's a lot less oxygen to breathe, and they would tire out quicker. So you go to Colorado and try to run around at 10,000 feet. In Leadville, I did that. I spent a night in Leadville. I went up 2 flights of stairs because I don't know why they were just mean. I said, why couldn't you get me on the first floor? Well, I had to go up 2 flights of stairs. My wife's saying, why are you huffing and puffing? I'm like, well, at 10,000 feet, and I'm going upstairs. You try that at home. It's half the oxygen up there, so it's difficult. So I think after the flood, that's what happened. And I do blame that on why Noah got drunk. But that's another story itself. Human interaction probably played a part also. I think we helped kill off some of the dinosaurs. You can look at these things if we get this to work. Here you have the old story of St. George and the dragon. He was probably killing a dinosaur. There's probably some reality to some of these knights killing dragons stories. And this is a classic one there. Humans probably were killing some of these dinosaurs, but they couldn't grow as big or as fast or be as active because the world wasn't as warm. They didn't have as much oxygen for them to run around and do their thing, because I believe they were cold-blooded animals, but they just couldn't be as active. So there's a lot of human interaction with dinosaurs. Evidence in texts, we'll talk about the Bible, pictographs, paintings and carvings, petroglyphs, artwork. I'm just going to give you a smattering of them. There's whole books on these, but we're going to talk a little bit about Behemoth, where God says in Job, he tells Job this in Job 40, behold now Behemoth, which the people that did the King James didn't know how to translate this. They just left it in the Hebrew word. Now, if you're in Texas, you say Behemoth, or they pronounce it funny in Texas. I don't know how they say it. Texans are funny people. They pronounce everything funny. You guys think I talk funny because I'm from the Great White North, but not quite that far north, not in Canada. I just have relatives in Canada. They married into him. It says, behold now Behemoth, which I made with, he eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins, the force in the muscle of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are like bars of iron. A lot of people downplay the tail like a cedar, but again, as they walk, even the four-legged ones, they would swing back and forth because they have muscles attached from here back to the tail. And so all the dinosaurs would swing their tails when they walked to balance out. The tails were there for a reason, to balance out the head and the neck on all these dinosaurs. But many people scoffed that they ate grass. They didn't believe grass even evolved. If you're an evolutionist, you didn't believe grass even evolved. It doesn't show up in the fossils till after the dinosaurs are gone. So they're like, this can't be a dinosaur. They didn't eat grass. But they did. So it says he eats grass like an ox. 2005, they found 5 species of grass in the dung of these long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. So when you see horse droppings, you can see what the horse ate. when you see dinosaur droppings, you can cut into it and see what the dinosaurs ate, and sure enough, there's the fossil. There's the grass. 5 species of grass. It wasn't just one species. And these are these sauropods, these long-necked dinosaurs, probably like behemoth, they actually were eating grass. So they had to go back to all their paintings of all these dinosaurs over the years, where they kept saying there's no grass here because it didn't evolve, and they could start putting grass in now, because the dinosaurs really were eating grass. The Bible was right all along, folks. Why do we doubt? We should never doubt God's word. It's the only truth there is. Science is not truth. God's word is truth. Science is today, modern science anyway, is a poor interpretation of reality, because it's so twisted to tell a story that's not true. Here's Behemoth. You see his strength is in his hips. You can look at the hips of these things and study them. You see those massive leg bone. The power is in the stomach muscles. Dinosaurs, like many dinosaurs, and I have a bunch of these in my office. I have a bunch of these gizzard stones that I collected with the dinosaur bones, these rounded, smooth stones. And here's one where a dinosaur, this is some dung that pooped out a gizzard stone. So that's some of the dung, but they had these massive gizzards because they didn't have a lot of teeth. These big sauropods just had front teeth, most of them. They didn't have teeth to chew with. So they had to swallow their food in their little bitty head all the way down, and God gave them a gizzard. They would swallow stones so they could grind their food up. And so I've got a few of those. Once in a while I stick them in my mouth just for fun. No, I don't do that. Just like I don't lick the dinosaur dung. I don't. Not a good idea, because people get germy hands when they touch them. So. And it says his bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. You look at these things. Here's a big femur of a sauropod. Does that look like a beam of bronze? It's a massive beam. You look inside it, it's solid. Unlike those tail bones and stuff, the vertebrae are light. These are solid bone. Very, very solid, strong legs to support that massive 50-ton body or whatever it was. And the ribs are the same way. Look, the ribs are solid as well. Behemoth, I believe, is some sort of sauropod, this big long neck. There's a T-Rex for scale and a human for scale to some of the big behemoths. Some of these things might have been 500, 600, 700 years old. That's how they got so big. Just like humans were 800, 900 years old in the pre-flood. But Behemoth, he says he is first in the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. So nobody can kill him with a sword, really, except the Lord himself, once they get that big. And when they got that big, even the T-Rex wasn't going to mess with them. You know, how many adult elephants are being attacked by lions? Not very many. They go for the little ones. You got to protect those little ones you guys have, because we're more precious than a baby elephant. We're created in God's image. Leviathan, let's look at Job 41. Now there's a little more debate on this one. My colleague, Dr. Brian Thomas, thinks it's a big crocodile-like thing, but I think it might have been this. I had this in my book. It might have been like Spinosaurus. And so look at these little Spinosaurus things. Can you draw Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue with a line you lower? So this dinosaur actually spent a lot of time in the water, they think. Maybe shallow water, swimming around, doing its thing. Had a big sail sticking up on the back. The biggest one ever found was about 50 feet long in Morocco. So it's the biggest meat-eating dinosaur of all. I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions, the Lord says. Who can remove his outer coat? Talking about his strong, scaly skin in Job 41, 12, and 13. Who can open the doors with his terrible teeth all around? The Spinosaurs are these big teeth coming down the top jaw. If you're canoeing on a lake right here and you saw that coming at you, would you canoe faster or slower? I would canoe as fast as I could. Get away from him. His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal, just like the last dinosaur, a very strong, scaly skin, one so near the other that no air can come between them. Just stronger than crocodile. They actually did a test on crocodile skin with a mock-up of a velociraptor claw, another big claw that's supposed to dig in and hold on to animals, and it hit it, and it broke the claw. It didn't break the scaly crocodile skin even. These were tougher than that, probably. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid because of his crashings. They are beside themselves. So if this thing reared out of the water, I think we'd be afraid. He could get up on its back legs. And then, though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does a spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. So it's very difficult to kill this, unless you had a modern-day machine gun. Maybe a 50 caliber machine gun would probably do it. His undersides are like sharp pot shards. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. So here's why I don't believe it's a swimming reptile, because they had to spread pointed marks in the mud. So dinosaurs like this was a small one, but dinosaurs like that had to leave pointed marks in the mud. So I had to walk on land occasionally. So I don't believe it was a mosasaur or a swimming reptile that lived in the oceans. It was something like this, I think. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. So when it swims around with that big sail sticking up, it's going to leave a big white wake behind it probably when it's tossing around. So that's another reason why I think it could possibly be this. And on earth there is nothing like him, the Lord says, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. And so this is the biggest meat-eating dinosaur that we've discovered so far. The biggest one is about 50 feet long, bigger than any T-Rex by about 10 feet. And so this would be a fearsome foe. Even after the flood, they might not have gotten quite this big. And so I put the Leviathan as possibly a Spinosaurus in my children's book. In the first one, Henry, that little book my wife and I wrote about Henry the Hadrosaurus, his little Henry over there. He said, "Don't worry, I'm just eating fish." So he drops the fish out of his mouth because he swam around eating fish. Because he had big jaws that probably could, like a crocodile that could get fish and things like that. So it's interesting. They made a little fun story out of it. It's one of three. There's still a lot of those available to purchase. In fact, these are actually stories. Well, most of our ICR stuff is just facts and articles, but this is actually some stories that doesn't mention anything about millions of years. Talks about thousands of years, if anything. And there's artwork. This is the Egyptian Narmer palette, it's called. If you look carefully in the red circle, you see these two long-necked animals. When the legs are coming straight down, now notice all these carvings and drawings I'm going to show you, the legs are coming straight down. When did we know the dinosaur legs came straight down? 1841. This is a few years before 1841. This is back BC times. I'm not sure the exact year, but there's the Egyptians up here, and they have ropes around their heads, like they're corralling these big dinosaur-looking things. Here's a cylinder from Mesopotamia in the Louvre in Paris, and you roll it out, this is what you get. These intertwined necks and heads of these big, long-looking sauropods, although the heads look like lions' heads, but they have these big, long tails. Who would draw something like this and then get it right with the legs coming straight down? Why would they make up an animal that looks just like the sauropods we see today? And they got the legs right. Legs coming straight down. No drag, belling, no tail dragging. How would they know how to do this unless they had seen one? And then here's two sauropods from 1496, carved around Bishop Bell's tomb in this cathedral in the UK. And it's about a little strip of brass that went around all sides. He's buried in the ground like they bury a lot of people in England in the bottom of the church. Like right here, King Henry VIII is in the middle of the church. I walked down his grave over in England where he's buried, because that's what you do. It's interesting the way they bury people right underneath the church. But how did they know the legs came straight down? And they had the long necks and long tails. And my friend, my colleague at work, Dave Napier, whose cousins were here last night, they're not here tonight because they got tired of me. He went over there and he talked to the guy into pulling back the carpet, because now it's covered because it's so worn down by people walking on it, because it's in the middle of the church. And he goes, "You're not one of those crazy creationists, are you?" And Dave's like, he didn't answer that. He goes, "Those creationists think this is some sort of dinosaur. This really is just a dragon." It's like, okay. But anyway, how did they know the legs came straight down? Long necks, long tails. How do you know? And here's another one that's in a carving in a temple. We have a mock-up of this whole column in our Discovery Center, life size. And this is one of the pictures, and above it is a water buffalo and a monkey, and below it is a lion. Every other animal is a real animal that we can recognize today, and then there's this in the middle of it all. And to me, it looks just like a stegosaurus. Again, look at the legs. Are they sprawling? Coming straight down. Every other animal is real in this thing. The Chinese zodiac. Go to your local Chinese restaurant. There's 12 animals on there. 11 of them are still with us. Then there's a dragon. Why would they have a dragon? 11 animals are real. And by the way, I'm a rat. So I'm like, that's fitting. But 11 of them are real. Why is one just a mythical animal? Why is this a mythical animal and everything else is real? They're all real. And why would the legs come straight down? So I'll wrap up here. 4 evolutionary myths busted. I went a little long, so I want to talk a little about Leviathan and Behemoth, because you guys are biblical people. So hopefully you didn't mind a few extra minutes. Number 1, dinosaurs did not have ancestral forms. I talked about these yesterday. There's no ancestors to any animal in the rock record. Everything shows up fully formed, just the way God made them in creation week. Although they adapted, a lot of them grew different numbers of horns and things like that. They're all from the same biblical kind. Secondly, dinosaurs did not evolve into birds. Anything that has feathers right now, the hip structure shows it's a bird, even if it had a little thin, bony tail. Didn't have a big, thick, massive, muscular tail, that would make it a dinosaur. But dinosaurs did not evolve into birds. We have birds before we have the so-called bird-like dinosaurs. That makes no sense. Number 3, dinosaur fossils are only 4,500 years old at the oldest. Probably a little less than that. How can they be millions of years old and still preserve all those proteins? There's been, again, over 130 papers now. These are evolutionary scientists finding these things. It isn't like creationists are finding them. We found some. But it's hard to get it published if they know you're a creationist. They look you up on Google now. We're not publishing anything this guy writes. But we got some people that still do. Brian Thomas, my colleague, went to the University of Liverpool in England for his PhD. And so he publishes with some of the guys at Liverpool. Some of them aren't even creationists. And they found some new collagen in a dinosaur they dug up in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. A new method of identifying it. They didn't realize, because his name's pretty common, Brian Thomas, a pretty common name in England. So he got away with it. But sometimes they'll catch you. Dinosaurs, number 4, went extinct after the flood. Exactly how, I'm not sure. I think it was kind of a climate change, dramatically different. They couldn't grow as efficiently, as fast. They couldn't reproduce as fast. And then humans might have killed a few of them as well. They might have killed the last one, like the dodo bird. They just went away. Now, we know they existed because we find their bones. But you don't make fossils after the flood. You're not making fossils. Fossils are, you need really fast burial, and you need really deep burial. We talked about yesterday to make a fossil. So animals today that die, they just rot away. They don't become fossils. Even the bones rot away. And so we don't have any dinosaur bones that have been sitting on the surface of the earth. They don't last very long. So after the flood, if you're not buried in the flood rocks, you're not going to make a fossil. So we don't have any fossil evidence of dinosaurs living after the flood. But we've got lots of artwork and carvings and drawings and even descriptions in books like the Bible. And so exactly which one those are, which species, I don't know. But I think Behemoth is some sort of long-necked dinosaur, and Leviathan might be like a Spinosaurus. I'm not certain on that either. But you do your own study. See what you think your best dinosaur is on Job 40 and Job 41. So you all read Genesis 7, right? After the sermon today, you went home and that was your homework. And now you got to read Job 40 and Job 41 and look through the dinosaur book and see which one you think it is. You might come up with something different, and that's okay. The bottom line is this: in all my talks, God's word is true. There really was a global flood. The rocks on every continent shows the same patterns, same thing. The fossils show the same order of fossils because you're burying the same ecological systems as the water went higher and higher. That's why there's really no extinctions in the fossil record. Just things disappeared. That's their last occurrence as a fossil. But many of these animals survived, obviously, after the flood. They just didn't make fossils. We still see a lot of swimming animals, like the coelacanth fish, supposed to be extinct in the rocks with dinosaurs, and yet it's still swimming in the world today. I am kind of glad dinosaurs are extinct, because they're kind of scary. But Terry Corner says the same thing. But the Bible, not only is it true, it points us to salvation through Jesus. It's a love story. There's some hard times in there, especially the Old Testament. People are like, how could God do this? He was trying to, some of these peoples had to be destroyed because if they didn't, they came back to haunt the Israelites. Later, generations later, because they didn't destroy them. So when they disobeyed and didn't do what God told them to do, they had to pay the consequences centuries later sometimes. But the Bible really does show us that imperfect humans, even David sinned. And he sinned greatly. God punished him. He lost his child. But God forgave him. So no matter what you've done, God can forgive you. No matter what you've done, God can forgive you. God commendeth his love toward us. He loves us so much that while we were yet sinners, lost in sin, like the pastor talked about today, lost in our own fleshly desires, a completely different man, Christ died for us to free us from that. We won't be totally free until we meet the Lord in heaven. Then he'll make us a new body. Right now, we're going through sanctification. But much more than being now justified by his blood, of course, we shall be saved. Saved from his wrath, but saved to live with Christ through all eternity. What better deal can that be? Jesus paid that price. He took our punishment. An infinite God can offer infinite forgiveness, and that's what he did. He's the lamb that was slain for you and for me. If you haven't made that decision to turn to Christ, give your life to Christ, it's the most important decision you're going to make in your lifetime. There's nothing more important than that. Anything you've done, he can forgive. Like the pastor said today, we're not perfect. We still sin. And we try not to because we try to obey the Lord. He's our Savior and our Lord. He's our King. You try to obey your King. But we know the promises, just like the covenants he made with the Israelites. He promised us salvation just by repenting and believing. He loves us that much. I didn't really realize unconditional love till I had my own children. You didn't realize you can love something so much until you have your own children. God loves us more than that. He loves the sinner more than that. He wants everybody to return. That's why he's still waiting to come back. He wants more to turn to him that he calls. When the number is right, he's going to return like a thief in the night. We need to be ready. In the back, these are all gone now, unfortunately, but you can order these online. ICR.org. You get the last copy. If she doesn't pay, we'll auction it off. But we won't do that. But you can go online. You go to Amazon even. Amazon sells these as well. And actually, the reviews are pretty good. They're like 4.9. So I'm like, woohoo. The reason they're not 5 is because I'm a sinner. But that's not true. No, it's because there's always a few people out there going, this guy's a charlatan. He believes in creation. He's a pseudoscientist. There's always a few people that are evolutionists that get out there and write bad reviews. But it turned out pretty good. My Carbon Stone's down there as well. And this is the first book of 3 that has those children's stories that kind of teach people about the flood and about dinosaurs from a biblical perspective. And without the millions of years. That's what my wife was really happy about doing because she said, I was at a Christian school for years, having to cross out all the millions of years and all the evolutionary stories in the children's books. They're indoctrinating our children. That's why that poor young kid was 7 years old and already believed in the asteroid, because he's reading the children's books that are out there. And most of them are telling lies. I wish we had more. 3's not enough. Write your own. We need more good children's books because we got to start training them when they're young. We start losing all of our children. There's just a study done not too long ago that most children start to doubt the Bible's truth in junior high. Just a little more lagniappe for you. They start to doubt the Bible. 40% of them start to doubt the Bible in junior high. It's not college. And then the other 40% in high school. By the time they get to college, most of them are already doubting the truth of God's Word because they're being taught evolutionary science. They're taught that we don't need a creator. We just showed up on our own one day over billions of years. They always have to hide it behind a shroud of time. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Time is their wizard. They think if given enough time, anything can happen. But yet we don't see the evidence for that in the rocks or the fossils. Just new things showing up over and over. I can't stress upon you enough to teach. We've got to teach our children when they're young. And this is a book. We still have a lot of these available. A $10 book. It covers a little bit of everything. You don't have to read it cover to cover. People read my Carbon Stone cover to cover. I'm like, wow. You didn't have to do that. You can bounce around in some of these books. Same thing with this. You can read what you want to read about. If you want to read about dinosaurs, there's chapters on that. Chimps and humans, how different we are. You can read that. You can read about astronomy. Stuff in the solar system that shows the Earth is young, the universe is young. A lot of it's in here. It's not all that old. We'll have to update it again probably in a couple years. But if nothing else, sign up for Facts and facts, if you haven't. I know many of you already have. Many of you get this. Many of you signed up in the back there. I'm going to head back there here shortly, and then I'll turn it back over to your loving pastor at this point. But I'm going to head back there, try to get rid of a few more books so I have to ship them back to ICR. It's always embarrassing when I send back 7 boxes of books. They send 7 boxes out and we send 7 back. I'm like, that's not good. No, I went a little long, I'm sorry. It's the Leviathan and Behemoth. We'll start question and answers at 6:30. We'll come back in here.